that's better. What's up, everybody? Another video. Today I wanted to discuss a trend that I've been noticing over the last, let's say 3 years. The last 2 years, fashion has once again adopted this rave culture aesthetic. It's something we saw in the early 2000s as well, mainly Rave, I suppose, maybe some early helmet in like the 90s. As we all know, fashion is just a vicious cycle. Once again, we see this trend of rave culture being adopted, being implemented, and coming to the forefront in today's fashion. First of all, I wanted to discuss what defines this aesthetic of rave culture. And by rave culture, I mainly mean the 90s Berlin club scene, techno, not the shitty PLUR from EDC or Tomorrowland or whatever. That's not rave culture. There are several other subgenres in this rave culture, like I sort of mentioned already, but the main focus is on 90s Berlin rave techno culture. I think the most defining aspects of Berlin club scene were the heavy use of leather, mainly leather coats and trousers, metallic colors, silvers, etc., neon colors, bright orange, yellows, greens, heavy usage of prints, mainly snake, leopard, and camouflage, some tribal here and there as well, but I think that kind of grew more into the early 2000s and mixed in some workwear inspired garments. Along with all of that, you also have the use of sheer materials and clear PVC jackets and coats. And lastly, just throw in some weird shades, some different silhouettes, and you've got a techno kid. Another part of the rave scene, probably more going towards the early 2000s as well, is the use of football jerseys and overall tracksuits. I think they become more of a part of the aesthetic of the early 2000 rave scene. Think of Slav, but with a different touch. So yeah, that is kind of what defines rave culture in my opinion. This leads us to the fashion of today and the adoption of rave culture. And to me, the most obvious front runner is Misbehave, obviously. I think their entire aesthetic is based on techno rave culture, and I think that's evident in almost every collection they've released so far. A lot of use of leathers, metallic and neon colors, heavy print use. To me, this is the epitome of modern day translation of 90s rave culture. But there are a few others that I'll also discuss in this video that take inspiration from this culture. As I've mentioned in some of my other videos, one of the brands that I've been really interested in over the last couple of seasons is GmbH. Although it's mostly workwear inspired, the adaptation of workwear into 90s rave culture allows for this aesthetic to be associated with rave culture. Some other less known brands are Martine Rose. For Spring Summer 19, Martine Rose used a lot of leather in terms of trousers, a lot of leather jackets, but also they used tracksuits. Some of them used some loud prints, mainly leopard, and then you also had some leopard, or it might be snakeskin. No, I think it was snakeskin loafers. Although there is some element of rave culture in this, I think it can also be seen as an adoption of early English garage sort of lad aesthetic. But to me, English garage and 90s Berlin techno, they kind of occupy the same space, and there's a lot of overlap between them. I think it can be viewed as both 90s techno as well as more English garage. Another brand that is perhaps even more unknown, Leo. This is perhaps the most unknown brand of everything that I'm going to be discussing today. It's a Brussels-based brand, and for their Spring/Summer 19 collection, they were heavily inspired by trance parties of Goa in India. Although it is another sub-genre of the entire rave culture, I think there are some similarities in garments that or similarities in characteristics that you can see. A lot of tribal and print usage. Snakeskin is probably the most prevalent one in this one. Again, leather as a staple for both outerwear and trousers. Although there are several elements that draw a comparison between the two scenes, there's a definite distinction between the two, because the Goa trance aesthetic features a bit more of a flowy, hippie element to it that is missing in the more raw and industrial Berlin scene. This leads us to the more well-known fashion brands and their use of techno-inspired garments in their collections. Most notably for me is probably Dior Homme. Under the helm of Chris van Osse, the house released their Fall/Winter 17 collection under the name They Should Let Us Rave, or They Should Just Let Us Rave, one of the two. Now, of course, seeing as how it's Dior, there's still a lot of sharp tailoring being implemented in their collection, and less baggy, authentic workwear, streetwear that is part of the whole rave aesthetic. The most obvious reference to the rave culture in this collection were the outerwear pieces and the eyewear pieces, in my opinion. Aside from the well-known print they used on several of their items, I think most people saw the full denim set that A$AP Rocky was wearing to one of their shows, but they used that print on bombers, on t-shirts, on everything. But to me, the outerwear pieces and some of the eyewear pieces give off this more raw Eastern European 90s industrial look. Think of fur bombers, puffer jackets, just some unique silhouettes in terms of eyewear. And then again, in his last collection for Dior Homme, before moving on to Berluti, Chris van Osse once again reverted back to rave culture for inspiration, and this is the Fall/Winter 18 collection. Perhaps this one is even more aimed at rave culture for the 21st century instead of 90s. Heavy use of tribals, I think that was the most prevalent part of the whole collection, but also they kind of strayed away from the more traditional Dior tailoring all the time and experimented with some more baggier silhouettes as well. Compared to the Fall/Winter 17, I think this is a better representation of what rave culture used to be like, even though it is still very cleaned up and dressed up. I think of the last 3 or 4 years, this is probably my favorite Dior collection. But then also one of the more well-known and hyped brands of the last 2-3 years, Balenciaga. They really embraced their workwear, but also 90s techno aesthetics. The most recent collection features the I Love Techno print, which is a bit too obvious, but the essence of rave culture is much more prevalent in earlier collections, like their Spring/Summer 18 collection, and their fall winter 17 collection. A lot of heavy leather jackets, camo prints, again use of heavy leather jackets, camo print, and utilitarian trousers. I think Balenciaga and Dior are the most well-known brands that adopted this 90s rave aesthetic, but of course designers such as Raf Simons have and always will use this culture for inspiration. Fall Winter 18 for Raf's own label featured a lot of drug and club references, as well as the by now famed Christiane F. I think the same could be said for designers such as Shane Oliver, whose Hood by Airline invokes similar memories or similar feelings towards rave culture, as well as his work he did for Helmut Lang a couple of years ago. Overall, the prevalence of rave culture has been coming more and more to the forefront. The industrial and raw look of 90s Berlin scenes are very intriguing and fascinating, but to me it is even more interesting how a culture based on this mindset of raw, dirty expression and not really giving a fuck about what you wear is being used in such a refined area as high fashion. But that's neither here nor there. That was all that I had to discuss for today. What are your guys or girls' thoughts? Do you have some other brands that you also think use this inspiration of 90s rave culture that I missed out on? Let me know. Anyway, thanks for watching, and as always, deuces.